The Queens Own Yorkshire Dragoons was a yeomanry regiment of the British Army in existence from 1794 to 1956. The regiment was formed as volunteer cavalry known as the South West Yorkshire Yeomanry Cavalry in 1794 during the French Revolutionary Wars. In 1844 it changed its name to the 1st West Yorkshire Yeomanry Cavalry. Finally, in 1897, after the Sheffield squadron had the honour of escorting Her Majesty, Queen Victoria, at Sheffield and being represented at the royal celebration of that year, the regiment became known as the Queens Own Yorkshire Dragoons. It was converted to an armoured role during the Second World War. In 1956 it merged with the Yorkshire Hussars and the East Riding of Yorkshire Yeomanry to form the Queens Own Yorkshire Yeomanry. Its lineage is continued today by the Queens Own Yeomanry. History, formation and early history. The regiment was formed in 1794 as the first Southern Regiment of Yorkshire West Riding Yeomanry. Disbanded at the Peace of Amiens in 1802, it was subsequently reformed in 1803. In 1844, it was renamed the 1st West Yorkshire Yeomanry Cavalry. It became the Yorkshire Dragoons in 1889, and the title was augmented with Queen's Own, after a royal visit to Sheffield in 1897. Second Boer War. The yeomanry was not intended to serve overseas, but due to the string of defeats during Black Week in December 1899, the British government realized they were going to need more troops than just the regular army. A royal warrant was issued on the 24th of December 1899 to allow volunteer forces to serve in the Second Boer War. The royal warrant asked standing yeomanry regiments to provide service companies of approximately 115 men each for the Imperial Yeomanry. The regiment provided 11th Company, 3rd Battalion in 1900, 66th Company, 16th Battalion in 1900, transferred to the 3rd Battalion in 1902, 111th Company, 3rd Battalion in 1901. First World War. In accordance with the Territorial and Reserve Forces Act 1907, which brought the Territorial Force into being, the TF was intended to be a home defense force for service during wartime, and members could not be compelled to serve outside the country. However, on the outbreak of war on the 4th of August 1914, many members volunteered for Imperial service. Therefore, TF units were split in August and September 1914 into first-line and second-line units. Later, a third line was formed to act as a reserve, providing trained replacements for the first and second-line regiments. 1/1 of a Stone Queens Own Yorkshire Dragoons. The 1/1 of a Stone Yorkshire Dragoons deployed to France in July 1915 as Divisional Cavalry A Squadron to 17th Division B and HQ Squadrons to 37th Division C Squadron to 19th Division. In May 1916 the regiment reassembled and became Corps Cavalry to 2nd Corps, with whom they remained until November 1917, when they were transferred to the Cavalry Corps. Up to this time their only chance of mounted action had been during the German retreat to the Hindenburg Line in April 1917. They were present at the battles of the Somme, the Ancre, the Somme and Ypres. Although in these battles there was no mounted fighting, they were often called upon to support infantry attacks with the Hotchkiss machine guns. In December 1917, the Yorkshire Dragoons were posted to the 8th Cavalry Brigade, 4th Cavalry Division, where they relieved the King's Dragoon Guards and took part in the Battle of Cambrai in 1917. As such, it was one of only 6 yeomanry regiments to be posted to a regular cavalry division in the war. The Yorkshire Dragoons were dismounted in February 1918 and returned to 2nd Corps as Corps Cyclists. From September to November 1918, the regiment fought with the 9th Division in the offensive east of Ypres. In action on 15 and the 20th of October, they captured over 100 prisoners with 7 field guns, 5 heavy guns, many machine guns and much transport. Hostilities came to an end on the 11th of November 1918, and they were selected for the Army of Occupation and acted as advance guard to the 9th and 29th Divisions during the advance into Germany. The regiment was stationed in the Cologne area until demobilization in July 1919, when Lord Scarborough received a letter of appreciation from the Corps commander. They have earned the gratitude of the country and county, in the way they have worked and fought all through the war, and have made a name for themselves which will never be forgotten. 2/1 of a stone Queens Own Yorkshire Dragoons. The 2nd Line Regiment was formed in 1914. In 1915 it was under the command of the 2/1 of a stone Yorkshire Mounted Brigade in Yorkshire, and by March 1916 was in the Beverley area. On the 31st of March 1916, the remaining mounted brigades were numbered in a single sequence and the brigade became 18th Mounted Brigade, still in Yorkshire under Northern Command. In July 1916 there was a major reorganization of second-line yeomanry units in the United Kingdom. All but 12 regiments were converted to cyclists, and as a consequence the regiment was dismounted and the brigade converted to 11th Cyclist Brigade. Further reorganization in October and November 1916 saw the brigade redesignated as 7th Cyclist Brigade in November, now in the Bridlington area. In March 1917, the regiment moved to Barmston, and in July to Burton Agnes. It returned to Bridlington in January 1918. About May 1918 the brigade moved to Ireland and the regiment was stationed at Fermoy, County Cork. There were no further changes before the end of the war. When the officers and men learned that the 2nd Regiment would not be going abroad, they applied for transfers to other regiments, and were gradually replaced by others who were recovering from wounds and disabilities. 3/1 of a stone Queens Own Yorkshire Dragoons. A 3rd Line Regiment was formed in 1915 and in the summer was affiliated to 5th Reserve Cavalry Regiment at York. Early in 1917 it was absorbed into the 6th Reserve Cavalry Regiment at Tidworth. Between the wars, post-war, a commission was set up to consider the shape of the territorial force. The recent experience of the Great War made it clear that cavalry was surfeit. The commission decided that only the 14 most senior regiments were to be retained as cavalry. 8 regiments were converted to armoured car companies of the Royal Tank Corps. 1 was reduced to a battery in another regiment. 1 was absorbed into a local infantry battalion. 1 became a signals regiment and 2 were disbanded. The remaining 25 regiments were converted to brigades of the Royal Field Artillery between 1920 and 1922. As the 9th most senior regiment in the order of precedence, the regiment was retained as horse cavalry. Second World War. During the Second World War, the Queens Own Yorkshire Dragoons were attached to the 5th Cavalry Brigade, part of the 1st Cavalry Division, when it became necessary to occupy Syria and the Lebanon to prevent their use by the Axis powers. The Dragoons were stationed on the Syrian frontier. They crossed the frontier in late June 1941, and occupied Quneitra. In July the regiment moved to Ezra in order to contain the French Draz garrison of Jebel Draz. On the 10th of July, Sea Squadron headquarters and two troops fought a patrol skirmish with French Draz cavalry, which was probably the last action of British horse cavalry. The Vichy French asked for an armistice on the 12th of July. From July until December the regiment garrisoned the Jebel Draz, prior to moving to Azib to train for mountain warfare. On the 13th of February 1942 came the news that they were to be re-rolled, and on the 1st of March they said goodbye to the horses. By a matter of a day the QOYD gained the distinction of being the last active cavalry regiment in the British Army. Intensive conversion training to becoming an armoured unit was carried out, whilst in May part of the regiment went up to the desert, taking part in the Battle of Gazala by holding the defensive box called Knightsbridge. They then subsequently withdrew to El Alamein after the disastrous First Battle of El Alamein, where they carried out the camouflage and deception plans, particularly the representation of dummy tanks. In July the regiment was hurriedly reunited and incorporated into Delta Force, which was formed as the last line of defense in the event of the Alamein line breaking. Owing to heavy losses in armor in the recent battles, it was impossible to fulfill the Commander-in-Chief's promise that the Yorkshire Dragoons should become an armored regiment. Instead, they were equipped with Bren carriers, 3-inch mortars and 6-pounder anti-tank guns, and placed under command of the 2nd Armored Brigade, 1st Armored Division, together with the based 9th Queen's Royal Lancers and 10th Royal Hussars. Each motor squadron was under command of an armored regiment, whilst the anti-tank guns were under command of brigade. The Second Battle of El Alamein started on the 23rd of October. By daylight on 24th the attack was partially successful, but the final minefield was unbreached. The regiment suffered considerable casualties in the congested minefield areas prior to the breaking of the line on the 2nd of November. When the 1st Armoured Division started the pursuit, it led as far as Timimi. At the end of January the regiment went straight into the line at Medinine for the frontal attack on the Muret line that failed, after which 1st Armoured Division was moved round to the south to advance to El Hamma. In March the attack on the Akarit line was successful and the division once again took up the pursuit. By early April the 1st and 8th Armies had joined forces, and 1st Armoured Division came under command of the 1st Army for the final phases of the Battle for Tunis. The regiment remained in North Africa for a further 8 months, during which time they converted to Laureate Infantry, becoming the 9th Battalion, Queens Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, as part of 18th Infantry Brigade. In February 1944, they were sent to fight in the Italian campaign, landing at Anzio under command of the 1st Infantry Division, which was temporarily under command of Mark W. Clark's U.S. Fifth Army. An attack on the 13th of March cost the regiment 170 casualties in killed, wounded, and missing. These were not replaced until early May prior to the breakout at the end of the month. On the 3rd of June they led the attack on the Ardennes line, opening the road to Rome. After a period of training the regiment moved up to Florence, reverting to command of 1st Armoured Division for the attack on the Gothic line. The original Yorkshire Dragoons, who had served 4.5 years abroad, were sent home at the end of August prior to the attack. The first attack on Coriano Ridge secured a precarious foothold but failed to achieve its objective. The regiment, which was in reserve, stabilized the position and 3 days later carried out an attack that took San Savino. where 600 prisoners were taken, and 2 days later they carried a further ridge. However, such was the shortage of infantry replacements in the British Army at the time, as all were being sent to 21st Army Group in the Northwest Europe campaign, that 18th Infantry Brigade was broken up and the personnel were used to reinforce other units. The regiment was placed in suspended animation, and the majority of the officers and men were posted to the 4th Battalion, Queens Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, serving in the 138th Infantry Brigade of the 46th Infantry Division. You may well be proud of the part your regiment has played in our great victories out here, wrote Field Marshal Harold Alexander, and I shall always feel very proud to have had the Yorkshire Dragoons under my command. Post-war, after the Second World War, the Yeomanry regiments in Yorkshire were amalgamated into the Queens Own Yorkshire Yeomanry, which was formed on 1 April 1967 as a TAVR3 unit with the RHQ and A Squadron at York, B Squadron at Doncaster and C Squadron at Hull. Then on 1 April 1969, they were reduced to cadre and finally reformed on 1 April 1971 as A Squadron, the Queen's Own Yeomanry. Battle Honours. The Queen's Own Yorkshire Dragoons was awarded the following battle honours. Bibliography. Barlow, Leslie, Smith, Robert Jeffrey. The Yorkshire Dragoons. Robert Ogleby Trust. P. 32, ISBN 0-94677182-0. Beck, Major A. F. Order of Battle of Divisions Part 1. The Regular British Divisions. London, His Majesty's Stationery Office. ISBN 1871167094. James Brigadier. British Regiments 1914-18. London, Samson Books Limited. ISBN 0-906304-032. Milam, Patrick. The Yeomanry Regiments, 200 Years of Tradition. Edinburgh, Canongate Academic. ISBN 1898410364. Perry, F.W. Order of Battle of Divisions Part 5b. Indian Army Divisions. Newport, Gwent. Ray Westlake Military Books. ISBN 1871167238-X. Rinaldi, Richard A. Order of Battle of the British Army 1914. Ravi Rikai. ISBN 9780977607280.